My friends, and yes, inevitably my foes, if ever there were a moment to channel that old Orwellian dread, that sense of seeing one's most cherished illusions unravel beneath the merciless glare of reality, it is now. From my cloaked vantage, be it a Klingon bird of prey or a Romulan warbird skulking at the periphery, I watch, with a measure of reluctant fascination, the once hallowed enterprise reduced to a spectacle of disintegration that would make even Dostoevsky's most tormented souls shudder. Lieutenant Worf, hitherto a paragon of gruff discipline and Klingon honor, has transmogrified into something that can only be described as Raskolnikov with biceps. No moral calculus remains, only a raw, brute impetus to destroy everything in sight. And so we watch from our furtive stations as he systematically pounds the corridors to scrap, throwing about what was once Federation idealism in a manner that recalls Orwell's terrifying notion of a boot stamping on a human face forever. Except here, it's the fist of a maddened Klingon, pounding on the hull of the Federation's flagship. Historians, assuming any survive this cosmic debacle, may choose to interpret this fiasco as the inevitable cost of believing in the innate goodness of one's institutions, an assumption that smacks of a distinctly Orwellian doublethink, if I may say so. The Federation has long prided itself on certain lofty virtues. That we hold these truths to be self-evident sort, transplanted into a future that was meant to leave our baser impulses behind. But as Dostoevsky would warn, there's no outrunning the subterranean aspect of human or Klingon nature. We might flatter ourselves that the Federation is a realm of high-minded philosopher captains. But in truth, we are ever one catastrophic mutation away from unleashing a savage meltdown on the scale of Worfs Rampage. To observe the Enterprise, once the shining emblem of rational order, now twisted like a wounded beast in the vacuum of space, is to sense that creeping irony Dostoevsky so often whispered about, that destruction and creation are oddly intertwined, and that our best-laid plans inevitably founder on the rocks of our own primal instincts. From the battered nacelles to the perforated saucer section, each reverberation sends a shockwave of existential dread through all who witness it. Allow me to sketch a scene worthy of the darkest Orwellian satire, where the corridors known as Jeffrey's Tubes become catacombs for the doomed. These are labyrinths originally intended for meticulous rational repairs, symbolizing the Federation's confidence in methodical progress. But now they lie battered and broken, an industrial-tinged echo of Orwell's memory hole, where illusions of civility go to die. Among the twisted metal and sparking cables we find Worf, no longer the stoic Klingon of law, but a howling embodiment of chaos. Precisely the sort of savage moral meltdown Dostoevsky warned us could lurk beneath any carefully composed exterior. Whether the cause is a cosmic fluke or some dreadful miscalculation, perhaps an irony-laden footnote in the Federation's log, it nonetheless lays bare a universal truth. Advanced technology and high-minded creeds can be undone by the most elemental barbarism if one fails to remain eternally vigilant. Orwell's boot is no longer an apt enough metaphor here. We require a far more gargantuan image to capture the unbridled force of a Klingon warrior in meltdown mode. Meanwhile, as I hover under cloak, I can't help but register the faint tang of schadenfreude that must be emanating from certain Romulan and Klingon corners. The Enterprise, the Federation's shining champion, reduced to scraps by the fists of its own security chief. It's as if the entire moral architecture has folded in on itself, reminiscent of the Grand Inquisitor's cunning insinuation that mankind, or Klingon-kind, cannot handle true freedom, and thus will sabotage it. Here, sabotage has a more literal face, courtesy of Worf. Consider, too, the possibility that this meltdown stands as a parable for how the Federation, in all its paternalistic confidence, has underestimated the latent forces that dwell in the moral hinterlands. Ideals, no matter how well-intentioned, are forever vulnerable to the unstoppable tides of nature. We might recall Orwell's caution that idealism can swiftly morph into tyranny, and here, ironically, that tyranny takes the form of a single raging warrior, disintegrating the hull that once sheltered him. And let us not overlook the looming threat of the warp core, a glowing testament to the Federation's capacity for harnessing the very power of the cosmos, which now threatens to implode in a demonstration of cosmic comeuppance. Were it to go, the resulting conflagration might well herald for parsecs around the meltdown of an entire worldview. One hears in the distance the echo of Dostoevsky's warning: if there is no rational order, if there is no bulwark of moral certainty, then indeed everything is permitted. The Enterprise, so often hailed as the Ark of Civilization, has become a floating cautionary tale. I can imagine Captain Jean-Luc Picard himself, arch-advocate of reason, culture, and Shakespeare, staring aghast from some battered bulkhead, reciting lines that would remind us of the age-old question, how swiftly does reason yield to unthinking might? In this final crisis, his rhetorical flourishes might ring hollow against the clang of Worf's unrelenting fists. Let there be no doubt. As I pen these observations from my cloaked perch, I do so in the spirit of contrarian reflection. For it is easy to mock or to moralize, but far harder to live with the haunting recognition that in this confrontation between Federation ideals and Klingon ferocity, we see mirrored our own dichotomies: reason versus passion, civilizational aspiration versus the nightmare lurking within. In the words Orwell never quite wrote, but certainly implied, the monsters we fear are rarely from outside. They often dwell in the machinery itself, just waiting for a system glitch, a psychological snap, to let them loose. And so, dear Federation, dear Klingon Empire, dear Romulan Star Empire, let this fiasco serve as a stark memento mori to all proud illusions. From this veiled vantage I bear reluctant witness to your luminous ship, once the emblem of optimism, now battered and hemorrhaging in the silent void. No advanced warp drive or noble principle, however vigorously championed, can evade the primal meltdown that lurks beneath. In the final calculus, this spectacle proves that we are not so far from Dostoevsky's dank underground as we'd like to believe. To see the Enterprise undone from within is to learn an unpalatable lesson. Might may not make right, but it can still unmake what is good, and very quickly indeed. That is the bitter moral of our tale, a sermon that neither Federation philosophers nor Klingon mythmakers would relish. But ignore it at your peril, for the lesson resonates across parsecs and centuries alike. A society that fails to confront the barbarism entrenched within its own halls stands only one frenzied outburst away from annihilation. Thus I sign off with the final observation that this is no mere science fiction pantomime. It is a reflection, through a warp-distorted lens, of the savage truth Orwell laid bare and Dostoevsky plumbed to its anguished depths. We are, all of us, ever on the brink of punching through the very framework that sustains us. Let us remember that the next time we boast of our inevitable progress. For in the stark glare of this cosmic drama, we glimpse how easily the shining starship can degenerate into drifting wreckage, and how swiftly our cherished reason can be eclipsed by the savage shadows of our own creation.